Hi, welcome to the Trauma and Resilience Podcast. I'm Ricky Robertson. Today, our guest is Mathew Portell. Mathew is an educator, advocate, and founder of the Trauma Informed Educators Network and Paradigm Shift Education. Mathew currently works as the Director of Communities at the PACES Connection. You can also find a podcast that Mathew hosts through the Trauma Informed Educators Network. Today, we'll be talking about leading for resilience. Mathew, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here and be on the other side of a podcast. This is amazing.
I'm a little curious. How did your journey to becoming an educator? How did that begin? How'd you decide to answer that call?
There's so many educators with the stories of, I knew when I was 5, and I'm not one of them. To be quite honest, I started off in forestry, of all things, when I started in college. I say that, but my college experience was one that was riddled with all kinds of struggles, to be quite honest. And I started at a tiny little college that just it didn't fit me. I ended up dropping out for a while, ended up finishing at a community college. And it took me a while to get my undergrad, but I continually was told by people, you have a gift for kids. Kids radiate towards you. You have a gift for kids. I was told this my whole life. And finally, I decided, you know what? I should probably go to into education. Something I love. I love teaching. I love being in front of people. I love kids. But I had no idea how deeply that passion ran until I got into my undergrad courses around education. And the first time I stepped into a classroom as a student teacher. And I remember leaving that placement. It was second grade. Mm-hmm. I remember actually weeping the last day because the relationships and community I felt in that classroom. It was hard. And I knew from that moment, this was it. This was what I was supposed to do.
I hope this isn't too personal, but you mentioned that when you're getting that undergrad, it took you a while, and that there were some points when you maybe, it sounds like, dropped out or kind of put your education on pause.
Mm-hmm. I think, Ricky, that this comes down to the work that we're going to be talking about. Mm-hmm. And it's trauma, right? And I was using coping mechanisms in my late teens, early 20s that were not healthy. And I have since reconciled with the idea of we all go through things and we all manage those things however we can. Shame is such a driving factor for so many people, kids, adults, college students. I was living with so much shame that I wasn't good enough. I didn't have the ability to do it. I was told by many adults in my life. And it wasn't until I met my now wife that she saw potential in me I didn't even see in myself. And she said, if you're going to be a teacher, you can be one of the best. I already know it. Just that one interjection of an amazing relationship changed the trajectory of my life and career. Wow. And it took me battling those internal voices that I had been told externally that I wasn't going to be good enough. I was in trouble a lot in school. Mm-hmm. I was mischievous. I say now I use my disruptive spirit for good, the powers for good, where before I operated in a way that I can identify with a lot of kids who struggle in school. And so I think it all comes down from my experiences and me not believing I was good enough and capable enough of being successful. When that shifted, it all shifted.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think, we're kind of close in age. And I think that when we were kind of growing up, there was this focus on like you finish high school, you go to college, there was all this messaging, like you go to college. But there wasn't really an emphasis on learning the skills you would need in order to handle that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something I'm incredibly thankful for in terms of the shift that we're seeing in education, in terms of focusing on learning those social emotional skills, those self-management skills, the skills that you really need to persevere in an educational journey and to disrupt the shame or the fixed mindset or the impacts of trauma and adversity that can really start to have somebody feel like their future is foreclosed. And so a question I have about that journey is at what point in your work as an educator did you start to become aware of the prevalence and impact of adverse childhood experiences and trauma?
Interesting enough, pretty quickly, to be quite honest, but we didn't have the science. I didn't have the name, right? We didn't have the ACE study. We didn't have some of this backing. And to be honest, unfairly, it was just called poverty, right? We now know that poverty doesn't necessarily correlate to trauma, but it's what we called it, right? And it's sad that that was the definition that drove, because we know that trauma happens in all communities, no matter the demographic, no matter the socioeconomics. Trauma is widespread. I believed in my classroom, just like I did in the schools I led, it was about community. And we built a community where kids would talk about things that happened to them, right? And as a community, we validated, we listened, we supported, we celebrated each other, right? And I think from the moment I walked into a classroom, I was unconventional. I didn't do it the way everybody else did it. I was trained very early on in Kagan cooperative learning, which I'm such a huge advocate for, because it builds that true engagement with kids.
Yes.
So, for example, I had my first year teaching, I put the kids in their desks in rows facing each other, so they had a shoulder partner and a face partner. And we had a rule that if anybody did anything amazing, the kids got to nominate. They got to run down the middle, and everybody give you high fives, and we celebrated, right? Like, I remember when some of the district admin walked in, and there was a kid running between the desks, and we were all celebrating, and I was like, uh-oh. And I remember the look on his face, like he was like smiling. I knew that kids brought with their experiences with them from early on. It wasn't until I became a principal my very first year that I learned about the science, the neuroscience about it, the physiological responses, the health outcomes. That was during literally the January of 2015, my first year as a principal.
And so you learn about that science, and you're an administrator at this point, which I'm going to be honest, and there's probably other administrators that will be listening to this, not necessarily a career position that invites disruption. There's so
That's
much.
a good way to say it. Yes.
Yeah, there's so much that has to be done, and so many things that we have to take care of. I mean, administrators are kind of running a small city every day, and so you come in now with this mindset, this disposition, and then now this knowledge to really become a game changer around trauma-informed care. And what was that journey like, to come back to your school as an administrator and think about how to shift that culture to be more trauma responsive?
It literally was a paradigm shift, which is a moment in time in which your one way of thinking is completely changed. And that is exactly what happened to me. I was actually invited. He was a community mental health provider, a friend of mine who since has passed. And he handed me an envelope, and it was about this lecture called the Barbara Gay Lecture at Vanderbilt University, with a neuroscientist and an assistant principal out of DC. And then there was going to be a screening of Paper Tigers after this talk. And I remember sitting in the talk, and they start talking about adverse childhood experiences and the 10 indicators and the outcomes and the impact on brain development. And I mean, it was a flood of information, which then in return invoked a flood of emotion. And it hit me really, really hard. So people knew I was an administrator. I was the only school administrator in the whole lecture. So I got invited to a question and answer afterwards with the guests. As they began to ask questions, I could feel myself literally breaking inside, because I had realized what I was doing to kids isn't what I should be doing with and for the kids, right? That I was doing things to them. And in that moment, I realized I was actually hurting children, not physically, but could be emotionally actually hurting kids. And I've never met an educator that said, the reason I got into education is because I want to mess some kids up, right? That's never happened. There isn't anybody out there, right? And when you hit that point of realizing that your mission has always been to motivate, lead, and inspire others to be their best, and you realize, oh my goodness, the practices that I've been doing could actually have a harmful effect. It's an emotional experience, right? But it's also a paradigm shift. So I knew in that moment during that question and answer, I actually sobbed, because I was reconciling what I had been doing. And I'd only been a principal for 6 months. It wasn't like I had been doing this for years. And I didn't do these practices as a teacher. I was doing really SEL, trauma-informed practices as a teacher. I didn't even know that's what it was. But for some reason, when I got into the administrative role, I felt I had to do what I was told to do, which is suspend, which is shame, And ethically, I knew that wasn't right. Now I had the science to back it. And at that point, if I didn't do something differently, right, when I came back, then to me, I was committing malpractice because I knew better. In the words of Maya Angelou, you do what you know. And when you know better, you do better. I knew I had to do better. So that's where the journey began.
You talked about toxic shame, and I get that. I started this work very much kind of hitting rock bottom in my own life. And what I think is amazing, because I kind of intimately get that world of toxic shame in my own way, is that you talked about seeing this way that you potentially had harmed kids or hurt kids in practices. But one thing shame can do is it can make folks really defensive, and they can actually shut down and resist change and resist vulnerability and resist saying, okay, I know better now, I'm going to do better. And instead you were able to find that space of kind of courageous vulnerability that involves some grief, is what it sounds like, right? Like kind of grieving and moving forward, almost, grieving a way that you used to do things to step into a transformative space, a paradigm shift. And that's remarkable. So I also just want to honor you in that, because that is inspiring to hear as an educator. I can think of so many times when I learned better and then didn't want to do better because I was too exhausted, too burnt out, my inner critic was too strong. And so the fact that you stepped into that, I think, is so powerful. But that's your personal transformation. And I think part of this work is that whether you're going to lead it in your classroom, as a paraprofessional, as a teacher, as a school administrator, as a bus driver, there's a personal transformation that says, okay, I'm going to focus on supporting the well-being of students, building these relationships, learning and doing better. But then you take on systemic transformation, right? Like you come back into a building where you're then tasked with how do you build a team and how do you start to shift practices school-wide. And so what did that shift in practice start to look like within your school?
It's what I call embracing the mess, because it's messy. It is. Anytime change and these things happen anywhere, in organizations, in companies, in districts, in systems, it's messy work, right? And it was kind of messy at the beginning. If I know what we're doing is harmful and know what we're doing is not working, then we have to do it differently. And I'll tell you one of the practices that I targeted very quickly. And I'm going to be honest, I very rarely just mandated something. It's not my leadership style. It's just not how I operate. I'm very much a team, collaborative, cooperative, decision-making type of leader. But it was the public clip charts, right? And this is by no means like shaming adults, because it's still used. It's used locally here, even in my own county.
So Mathew, just realizing some folks listening may not be familiar with the phrase clip chart or what that tool is in the classroom. Would you describe it for us for just a moment?
It's basically a chart, mostly use different colors on the chart. Usually the middle is what's green, and that is you are doing exactly what you should. You're meeting expectations. And then there's multiple colors that go upward, which means you are excelling, right? And then there's colors that go down. That means you are not doing what you should. And ultimately, kids are they are given direction to clip up or clip down based off of how they're performing in the classroom. And it's usually done in public. There are other avenues where it's not done in personally, but it's still using the idea of shame as a function to change behavior. But I knew immediately that it was not okay when we're publicly shaming children to try to get them to comply. That isn't skill building, right? That isn't anything other than I'm trying to shut you down as a human to get you to do what I want you to do. And so how I did that was I basically said, we're not using them anymore. And there was pushback. So I agreed with the adults that if we're going to use them as a school, then I'm going to use them in faculty meeting. And that is, if you pull your cell phone out, I'm going to simply just call your name. You're going to get up. You're going to come to the front. You're going to clip down, right? Never in a million years would I ever done that to the staff I worked with, right? Never. But I wanted to make a point of, if you don't want me to do it to you, don't do it to a student. And this goes to the administrators, you all, because I think there's so many administrators that believe in this work, but they don't see it as we have to do the same practices and pre-forgiveness and grace and support for the staff that we work next to so they can understand to do that work with the students. For some reason, there's a disconnect on the need of supporting and building up school educators and understanding they're bringing trauma with them as well. They're bringing not just child experiences, they're bringing life experiences. In my 7 years as a principal, I had a veteran teacher lose an adult son to a car accident. I had multiple people get divorced. I mean, I had a lot going on. I lost my own mother, right? And I had to humanize the educators in the building. And I think that is such a key to this work that we have to be talking about, because as educators, and this is going to be something you're going to be like, oh, I can't believe he's going to say this, but this idea of self-care is really driving me absolutely insane. And I'm going to tell you why.
No, it makes sense. Yeah.
We have to be collective care. We have to collectively, every educator in the building has to have that connection, community, and support for each other. The kids in the classroom have to have the community has to support each other, right? This isn't an individual isolated building resilience. Resilience is built from community. It's built from connections. And I think as an administrator, I learned that very quickly, that this was about support, validating, letting adults be seen, heard, and validated in the work that they do. Just like with the students, I could not use shame to get the adults to change their paradigm. I had to do it through support and letting them be seen, heard, and validated. And I think that was the biggest, most impactful shift that I had as an adult. And I brought everybody to the table. So we did collective decision-making. We did collective problem solving. We all agreed that we had to do it differently. And we were joining together to say, we're going to do it. We don't even really know what it's going to look like, but we're all committed to the work. And that really opened a door of opportunity to get people collectively on board. We just had the science. Now it was time to develop the practice. And I think it's important for educators to know we didn't get it right. We have to be cognizant as educators. We can't use shame as our driving factor to get other people to change. Because I run a network, it's 31,000 people, and I constantly am seeing shame being driven when people are saying, hey, this is happening in my classroom, and I did this, and people are like, oh, you shouldn't do that. That's not trauma-informed. Right?
Yep.
We have to be cognizant on how we are supporting each other, because collectively is how we're going to get the change to occur.
Absolutely. This is a journey of progress, not perfection. Now, in what you just shared, there's a few things I really want to highlight that struck me. I mean, you're actually preaching to the choir here. I think self-care is essential and not enough, that we have to be focusing on collective care. And I love that you really started the work by caring for the educators first, because, really we are the work. Right? If we want to see a shift in student outcomes, then how do we evolve our mindsets and our practices? And that's only going to happen when educators feel cared for, when they feel respected and heard. And I love that you made this really a communal journey about figuring out how we move forward. When you're disrupting certain practices, right, it kind of creates a void. Like, okay, if I don't have my clip chart anymore, now what do I do? And you move into the mess of trying to figure that out. And what were some of the practices that your school put in place that you found the most impactful, that you were like, okay, now we know we're moving in the right direction?
So I think if I talk in the context of the students and really the adults too, it was our peace corners, right? Places for de-escalation. Again, we didn't have it right at the beginning. We actually had kids go there to reflect. And I look back and I go, hey, we started it. We took the first step. We realized, wait, it's not about reflection. It's about understanding self-regulation. So then we started teaching self-regulation skills through an online platform. Again, continuing to grow, we realized my last year as a principal that wasn't even enough. So we actually hired a trained mindfulness and yoga trained educator who we actually taught hands-on with kids and taught them breathing and rainbow breathing and what do you do, right? What happens to your physical body. We taught them the neuroscience. So that is like one strategy. Another one, we focused on the adults. I realized that if we have escalated adults, we're going to have escalated students. It is that mirrored neuron. It is the science. It shows it very clear, especially Dr. Bruce Perry's work. It shows we have to be regulated, right? And regulation means we have to we have to understand our own emotions and our physical responses to stress, right? And so that practice was tap in and tap out, where we gave teachers a opportunity when they felt dysregulated. It could have been for something that happened in the classroom. It could be something that happened at home, right? And they could go on. We used GroupMe. It was a messaging app. So we messaged everything through this messaging app. And one of the channels was tap in and tap out. Teachers would say, I need to tap out. It went to everyone. Vulnerability is key, right? I used it. There were times when I needed to just tap out. I was feeling dysregulated because I was managing a student who was escalated for a long period of time. We had multiple adults come, gave that adult a minute to step out. Adult stepped in the room, made sure the kids were regulated as well, and then they could step back in. That's just one. We initiated a team of 7 people at the front door every single day. We actually opened the car doors for every single family every day. And that seems so simple, Ricky, but it is such a powerful tool. I got to say, and I was one of them, one of the 7. I got to say good morning to all the parents. I got to see how they were. I saw when there were siblings there. I got to pet the dogs when they were there. We got to see kids from the very moment they stepped out of the car. And there were some kids that stepped out of the car, and I've heard 1,000 times at school, they came in on 100. Well, if it's coming on 100, we need to get them to 80, hopefully 50, and ideally at 20, right? Mm-hmm. So we would head that off. I had a lizard in my office before I got an assistant principal. I called it my assistant principal. It was a great regulating tool, right? Kids loved coming in there. I had a tube called Find It, where it has its beads and it's got all these things. And I would have kids on secret missions. I would simply validate, you look really frustrated. Are you okay? No, Mr. Portell. Well, come on, let's go talk about it. Let's figure out what's going on. Those simple things had a major impact on the culture and the impact of the school. We also did that with adults. If I saw adults that weren't okay, I'd be like, hey, are you okay? Everything good? And every once in a while, I'd be like, I'd be like, I tell you what, let's get somebody. Let me get the instructional coach to come in just for a few minutes. Let's give you some time, right? Humanizing from the adult to the kid, to the parent, to the community was really the focus of starting the work. We had to see each individual person for where they are and what they may be managing or have had to manage in the past.
I think what I'm hearing in your leadership style is there's ways that you found to both connect and empathize with students and adults, but also create some structure and some consistency throughout the building. And that's so powerful, right? That this work doesn't fall on the shoulders of one person, an administrator or a counselor or a small group of teachers. It really becomes a school-wide approach. And it's difficult because it requires, as an administrator, to be connected and firm with students as well as staff to build those relationships. But then also, when you're building systems, there's resistance and there's accountability and there's a lot of challenges. So I think that even something as simple as we're going to greet students right when they're arriving in the morning, I mean, we can hear that and we can go, oh, that's a wonderful thing. But also, if we have ever had a leadership position within a building, we know that is no easy task, just even to coordinate the staffing and the schedules and making sure folks are there. And so I imagine that there were probably some hurdle that we're going to have to overcome in this journey that really stood out to you as a defining moment.
I think it's during the biggest hurdle was when we got into those most stressful times of the year, mm-hmm. which are October, November, mm-hmm. December, mm-hmm. January, February, March, April, May.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think also pushing against misconceptions. One of them is trauma-informed means kids don't have consequences. That is not true, right? That's a misconception. It's that we don't use shame and punishment as the driver. We use skill building and restitution as the focus through restorative processes, through all those pieces, right? Of having kids at the table together, having conversations. And then I think one other thing that became a barrier is that I learned that accountability without relationships and personal reflection can feel like an attack, right? And so that's whether it's a student, it's whether it's an adult, it's whether it's a parent, it's whether it's me as a principal. I found that the relationship was that driving factor for every piece. I could hold kids accountable in meaningful ways when my relationship with them was meaningful, right? The adults in the building, there was a sense of accountability when I had a relationship. It wasn't a write-up that's going to change it, right? It's that conversation. Hey, you made a mistake. It is what it is. How are we going to fix it? Going through the questions. What were we thinking at the time? What have you thought about since? Who's been harmed in the matter, and how are we going to make it right? I use those same questions with adults because for some reason, I guess when we become adults and have degrees that we are supposed to be perfect. And I think mistake making is part of this journey. It's part of the messiness where, hey, yeah, you kind of lost your cool with that student. It's time we do a restorative circle. We have to apologize. Mm. That in itself is challenging for a lot of adults. When I make a mistake with a student and I have to sit in front of them and say, listen, I was really frustrated and I shouldn't have raised my voice. And I'm sorry that I did that. And I think as a principal, and I'm going to show you because I keep it with me, I had to do that, right? I did that. And I had a student who she was in the front office. Student came in. She thought he was going to hit her, and she reacted, right? A lot of reasons why that reactive state was there, but I screamed at her, which I never did. I didn't scream at children. Immediately, I could see her disassociation shut down. She was gone, right? Safety measure happening. And so I knew I'd messed up. So I brought her in, and her name was Shanti, and I have permission to use her name. But I said, I am so sorry. I should not have yelled at you. I was mistaken. I thought you were upset and going after the student. That was not the case. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? And she said, I'll think about it. And I said, hey, I respect that, right? She was in 3rd grade. And I went back about an hour later and I said, did you think about it? She said, yes, Mr. Portell, I left a note in your mailbox. And I keep it with me because it's important. And she says, I accept your apology, Mr. Portell. Thank you. Right? So even as an administrator, I had to model that if I make a mistake with the kid, it's my due diligence to make it right. And then when she makes a mistake, she has learned through modeling, right? Even Mr. Portell sometimes makes mistakes. As adults, I think that's a key that we have to do in this work. We have to expect from ourselves what we expect from our students. And sometimes that is, again, getting messy and accepting when we make mistakes.
Absolutely. I mean, what's so incredible also is that in that moment of being an adult apologizing to a kid, you're affirming that child's self-worth as well and their value. So many children experience considerable harm for which they will never receive an apology or for which an apology will never be enough. And the harm that can do to someone's sense of self-worth. And so just stepping into that difficult, uncomfortable, vulnerable, humbling space as an adult, but in service of what that does to affirm and the self-worth of a child, that's incredible work and difficult work. And this really is a journey of progress, not perfection. And I've so heard that today. And so at this point, when you look back, what is one of the greatest lessons or ways that this work has transformed you personally and professionally?
I think personally, it healed a lot of my own experiences. My dad is a war veteran with severe PTSD, and he and I did not have a great relationship, and I didn't understand why. This science and this work has exposed that my dad is doing the best he can every single day as a father, as a human. And that in itself personally has been healing for me because I held a lot of disdain for the lack of connection that I had with my father, right? So that is huge. And I think there's a lot of educators who have experiences outside of their role as an educator that impacts them every day as an educator, right? And I think one of the lessons that I had to learn was just that, right? That as educators, we are interacting and impacting kids every single day. And we can't separate things that have happened to us from the work we do. Because there's this misnomer, this misidea that we can fake it till we make it, and it's not true. Our kids know when we're authentic. They know when we're dysregulated. They know when we're inconsistent. They know when we're unpredictable. They also know when we're predictable, when we're regulated, when we're consistent, when we show. They know those things, right? That all is true, right? And grappling with all of those pieces is challenging for an educator because we're told to pour everything you got out, right? It's like this idea that has been ingrained in us, but you can't do that. because then you can't be present, you can't be consistent, and you can't be regulated. And those three things must be present in every classroom, every day, and every school. And if you can't, you got to have a support system to be able to say, I need some support. Whether that's a colleague, whether that's a principal, whether that is what we used Happy Teacher Revolution. Every month, teachers got together and just talked about all of the things, right? So whatever it is, you can't leave yourself out of the equation for the sake of the work you do and the impact you have, because ultimately you're never going to have a greater impact than what you have individually on yourself, and then in return, those around you.
Thank you, Mathew, for your authenticity, your vulnerability, and your leadership. This has been an incredibly meaningful conversation for me, and I hope that our viewers have enjoyed it, and I'm certain they've been enriched by it. And I want to encourage folks to continue to explore Mathew's work through the Trauma-Informed Education Network, the Trauma-Informed Education Network podcast, as well as Paradigm Shift Education. The Trauma and Resilience series is made possible by a partnership between the National Education Association and WETA. For more information, please visit adlit.org/trauma. Trauma and Resilience is available on YouTube and on every major podcast platform. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe to the whole series so you won't miss an episode.